From the moment the cold wind slammed against the glass doors of the dealership that morning, it felt like the world had already decided what sort of day it was going to be for Daniel Hayes. The sky was gray, heavy, and restless, matching the ache behind his ribs, the ache he had lived with ever since the accident that took his wife 4 years ago. Still, he walked into that showroom with determination in his steps, scruffy boots, worn jacket, and hands trembling slightly from nerves as much as the December chill, because today wasn't about him. Today was about his daughter, Emma. Today, he wanted to give her one thing she had stopped believing she deserved, a Christmas miracle. If you believe in real kindness, second chances, and moments that restore your faith in humanity, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel name. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Daniel had spent months saving every extra dollar from his job as a night shift mechanic. He worked double shifts, fixed neighbors' broken lawnmowers, and sold almost everything of value in his home except the last photo he had of his wife. He didn't tell Emma what he was planning, because she would have told him not to push himself. She never liked to see him tired, never liked to see him struggle. At 17, she was bright, hopeful, and endlessly polite to everyone, yet she carried guilt she didn't deserve, guilt that whispered she was a burden every time he skipped dinner to save money, or came home exhausted with grease still staining his hands. The dealership, however, was nothing like the warm memory-filled home he came from. It was polished, shiny, full of fluorescent lights and glossy cars that seemed to gleam with silent judgment. Salespeople in crisp suits hovered around like sleek birds waiting for a signal. Some glanced at him and looked away. Others whispered. A few smirked outright, turning back to their desks with dismissive amusement. Daniel had been ignored many times in life, but today, the humiliation cut deeper because he wasn't here for himself. He walked slowly toward a used silver sedan near the far corner of the showroom floor. It wasn't brand new, but it was clean, safe, reliable, exactly what a teenage girl driving alone in winter needed. It was the car Emma had pointed at months ago when they passed by the dealership on foot. She said it with a smile that was half joke, half dream, "One day, Dad, a car like that. Doesn't have to be fancy." Daniel remembered the spark in her eyes before she quickly dimmed it, like she didn't want him to carry the weight of the wish. So he carried it silently. Now standing in front of the car, his breath fogging slightly inside the warm building, he reached out and touched the side mirror, imagining Emma's face when she would see it Christmas morning. She would probably cry. Or hug him too tightly. Or accuse him gently of overworking himself. But she would smile, really smile, and that alone was worth every long night he'd lived through. A voice burst into his moment of hope with a laugh sharp enough to cut through the air. Two salesmen leaned against the reception counter, whispering loudly enough for the room to hear. One of them shook his head, eyeing Daniel's faded jacket with amusement. The other chuckled, tapping his pen on the desk as he spoke loudly about window shoppers who can't afford even the keychain. Daniel's cheeks flushed hot. For a second, he considered walking out. It would be easier, nothing new, nothing painful. But then he saw Emma's face in his mind again, and that image steadied him. He wasn't leaving without trying. He approached the nearest salesman. The man plastered on a rehearsed smile but didn't hide the boredom in his eyes. When Daniel asked to see the car's details, the salesman exhaled dramatically, as though doing his job was an unbearable inconvenience. He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to someone who wouldn't understand anyway. He asked if Daniel had financing. He asked it twice, in fact, as if he couldn't believe Daniel might have a real plan. When Daniel replied that he didn't need financing, the man smirked. Another salesman snorted from across the room. A third one commented something sarcastic about cash buyers who always disappear when the numbers come out. Their laughter rippled together like a wave of mockery. One even suggested under his breath that Daniel probably just wandered in to get warm. Daniel stood still, letting the moment wash over him, letting the sting settle quietly inside. He wasn't a proud man, but he wasn't a weak one either. Every struggle he had lived through taught him to endure. So he took a slow breath, reached into his jacket, and placed a thick envelope on the polished desk. The laughter died instantly, cut mid-breath, mid-smile, mid-whisper, when the edge of the envelope parted slightly, revealing bundled stacks of crisp cash. The dealership fell so quiet that even the air seemed to hesitate. He spoke softly, steadily, without anger or gloating, because he didn't care to impress anyone. "I'm buying this car for my daughter. She gets her license next week. This is her Christmas gift." The manager came rushing out. Suddenly, everyone was attentive. Chairs were offered. Coffee was brought. Voices became polite, professional, even apologetic. But Daniel didn't care about their sudden courtesy. He only cared about the car, about ensuring it was safe enough for the girl who had held his world together after tragedy shattered it. As the paperwork was signed, he remembered nights when Emma found him sitting at the kitchen table, forehead resting on his hands, thinking about bills, repairs, school supplies. She would place her small hand on his shoulder and whisper, "We'll be okay, Dad." She had been only 13 then, too young to carry the weight of comforting a grieving parent, but she did it anyway. For 4 long years, she brought him laughter, strength, and a reason to rebuild himself piece by piece. Now, this was his turn to give her something she never expected. When he drove the car home, the winter sky had begun to brighten with late afternoon sun. The tires hummed softly against the road, and Daniel felt a strange mix of fear, relief, and pride filling his chest. Fear that he wouldn't be enough. Relief that, maybe for once, he had been. Pride that his daughter would know, truly know, just how much he had fought for her happiness. He parked the car in the neighbor's garage to keep it secret until Christmas morning. Every day after that, he went about his routine pretending life was normal. Emma studied for her exams, made him tea late at night, and hummed Christmas songs under her breath as she decorated their tiny living room with paper snowflakes. Sometimes, Daniel caught himself staring at her with quiet gratitude, grateful she never blamed him for life's hardships, grateful she chose joy even when life gave her little reason to. When Christmas finally came, he led her outside before the sun fully rose. The air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of pine and frost. Emma wrapped her coat tighter around herself, looking confused but smiling softly at the way her father seemed nervous. When the neighbor opened the garage door, the silver sedan sat there like a small miracle waiting to unfold. For several seconds, Emma stood frozen. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. Her glove-covered hand rose slowly to her mouth as she whispered a shaky breath more than a word. Tears welled instantly, clinging to her lashes until they fell in trembling drops. She walked toward the car as though afraid it wasn't real. When she reached it, she turned to look at her father, and the way she looked at him in that moment carved itself into his heart forever. She didn't see the worn jacket or the tired eyes or the man who spent too many nights alone. She saw the father who had given everything he had, every piece of himself, to make sure she never felt abandoned, never felt forgotten, never felt unloved. She saw the man who stayed. Daniel didn't expect her to cry so hard. He didn't expect himself to cry either. But when she threw her arms around him, shaking with grateful sobs, he felt warmth bloom deep inside the cold parts of him that he had ignored for years. He had kept going for her, and now she knew. Later that afternoon, when she took her first drive around the block, carefully, nervously, proudly, Daniel stood on the curb with a hand over his chest. He wasn't thinking about the salesman who laughed at him, or the long hours he spent earning the money, or the exhaustion he carried like a shadow. He was thinking only of how brightly she smiled from behind the wheel. That smile was worth every struggle life had ever sent his way. And somewhere deep inside, he hoped she would never again feel like she was a burden. He hoped she would always remember this moment, not because of the car, but because her father wanted her to know she was worth fighting for.